Sergeant Kyle Morrison stood in the massive assembly hall of the Galactic Unity Center, watching with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness as matched pairs were announced and brought together for the first time. The Interspecies Bonding Initiative was in its third wave. Hundreds of participants from dozens of different allied civilizations being paired through sophisticated algorithms that supposedly analyzed everything from genetic compatibility to psychological profiles to predict which partnerships had the best chance of success. Kyle had volunteered partially because his military command encouraged participation, and partially because he genuinely believed the program could improve interspecies relations in ways formal treaties never would. But watching the pairings being announced, he was also starting to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. The matches all seemed so reasonable, so carefully calibrated for compatibility. He watched a Valerian scholar, gentle species known for their philosophical approach and quiet demeanor, being matched with a human botanist who looked equally soft-spoken and thoughtful. He saw a Krenon engineer whose species valued precision and careful planning, being matched with a human architect who clearly shared those values. Every pairing seemed designed to minimize conflict and maximize compatibility, putting together beings whose personalities and cultural backgrounds suggested they'd get along easily and build partnerships without significant friction. Kyle's name was called, and he stepped forward with a confidence he didn't entirely feel, wondering which species he'd been matched with and what their initial meeting would be like. The program coordinator, a diplomatic Valerian who'd been managing the ceremony with practiced grace, announced, "Sergeant Kyle Morrison of Earth, you have been matched with Princess Zurith of the Draknari Empire." The murmur that rippled through the assembly hall was immediate and shocked. Kyle felt his stomach drop as he processed what he'd just heard. The Draknari were a warrior culture, aggressive, hierarchical, known throughout the Alliance for their martial prowess, and their tendency toward direct confrontation rather than diplomatic negotiation. They were part of the Alliance and not hostile, but they definitely occupied the more militant end of the spectrum, and they had a reputation for looking down on species they considered weak or overly focused on diplomacy over strength. And Princess Zurith was apparently famous even by Draknari standards. Kyle could hear whispered conversations around him from participants who clearly knew her reputation. The Emperor's youngest daughter, Notorious Temper, one of their best warriors. She challenged 3 combat instructors to duels before she was 15. This is going to be a disaster. When Princess Zurith entered the hall through the entrance designated for Draknari participants, Kyle immediately understood why everyone seemed so shocked and concerned about this matching. She was imposing in ways that made Kyle's military training feel inadequate. Draknari were generally tall, but Zurith was exceptionally so, probably 7 feet with the powerful build of someone who'd spent their entire life training for combat. She had the distinctive Draknari elongated ears that swept back from her skull in sharp, aggressive angles. Skin marked with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with colors Kyle had learned indicated emotional states, currently showing aggressive reds and oranges that suggested anger or hostility. She was wearing what appeared to be formal Draknari attire, but it was clearly designed with combat functionality in mind, and she moved with the fluid grace of a trained fighter who could probably kill him with her bare hands before he could draw a weapon. She looked at Kyle with an expression that mixed contempt with what might have been curiosity, though the contempt was definitely more prominent. Her first words to him were delivered in Draknari language that his translation implant rendered into English with all the bluntness preserved. "You are the human I am matched with. You look soft and small. This is clearly a mistake by your primitive matching systems." Kyle tried to maintain diplomatic courtesy despite the immediate insult, drawing on his military training in dealing with difficult situations. "Sergeant Kyle Morrison, ma'am, I'm sure we can make this partnership work despite any initial reservations either of us might have about the matching. I am Princess Zurith, daughter of Emperor Krantor, warrior of the Draknari Bloodguard. I do not have reservations. I have certainty that this matching is an error. But I will honor my commitment to the program because my father commanded my participation, not because I believe you will be an adequate partner for anything. The formal ceremony continued with Kyle and Zareth standing together in obvious tension, while other pairs around them seemed to be having much warmer and more positive initial interactions. Kyle noticed several program coordinators looking concerned and having quiet conversations while glancing in their direction, clearly aware that this particular matching seemed problematic in ways the others didn't. After the ceremony concluded, one of the senior coordinators, a human diplomat named Dr. Sarah Chen who'd helped design the program, approached Kyle and Zareth privately. I want to acknowledge that your matching is unusual. Princess Zareth, your psychological profile and cultural background are significantly different from Sergeant Morrison's, and I understand this pairing might seem counterintuitive. But I want to assure you both that the algorithm rarely makes errors. It analyzes millions of data points and has been refined over 5 years of the program's operation. The system matched you for reasons that may not be immediately apparent, but which our analysis suggests will become clear as you work together. I ask that you both give this partnership genuine effort and trust the process. Zareth's response was characteristically direct. I will fulfill my obligations as I said I would, but if this human proves inadequate, I will report the failure of your systems and recommend Draknari withdrawal from future program participation. Kyle added more diplomatically, We'll do our best, Dr. Chen, though I admit I'm curious about what the algorithm saw that suggested Princess Zareth, and I would be compatible when we seem to have very different approaches to, well, to everything. They were assigned to a frontier settlement on Caldara 7, a recently colonized world being jointly developed by multiple allied species as a demonstration of cooperation and shared governance. The settlement was relatively small, maybe 200 beings from various species, including program participants and support staff. Kyle and Zareth were given a shared dwelling designed to accommodate both their species' needs, with separate sleeping areas but shared common spaces where they'd be expected to spend significant time together. The transport to Caldara 7 was tense, with Kyle and Zareth sitting in awkward silence, punctuated by occasional attempts at conversation that usually devolved into arguments about cultural differences or appropriate behavior. When they finally arrived at their assigned dwelling, the conflicts began immediately over things Kyle hadn't even anticipated being contentious. Zareth wanted to reorganize the entire living space according to Draknari efficiency principles, which involved removing most of the furniture Kyle considered essential for comfort. Kyle wanted to establish a schedule for shared spaces and household duties, which Zareth viewed as unnecessary bureaucracy. They argued about food preparation. Draknari cuisine involved live prey that Kyle found disturbing, while human food struck Zareth as bland and overcomplicated in its preparation. They argued about noise levels. Zareth's combat training routines at dawn were extremely loud, while Kyle's preference for quiet reading in the evenings bothered Zareth, who viewed silence as wasted time. They argued about basically everything, and by the end of the first week, both were convinced this was the worst possible matching and that the algorithm had clearly malfunctioned. The other settlers started avoiding them because their arguments were so loud and frequent that they made everyone uncomfortable. The program coordinators at the settlement checked in multiple times expressing concern about whether their partnership was viable or if they should consider reassignment. But both Kyle and Zareth refused to quit. Kyle because he'd made a commitment, and his military training emphasized following through even in difficult circumstances. Zareth because admitting failure would be shameful by Draknari standards, and she refused to give anyone reason to say she couldn't handle a challenge. But underneath all the conflicts, Both were also noticing things about each other that contradicted their initial assumptions. Kyle noticed that Zareth's aggression usually masked a genuine commitment to excellence. She demanded high standards because she held herself to those same impossible standards, and her directness came from Draknari cultural values about honesty and transparency rather than from cruelty or disrespect. When she criticized his approach to something, it was because she actually believed he could do better, not because she wanted to tear him down. Zareth noticed that Kyle's diplomatic approach and careful planning actually achieved results that direct confrontation wouldn't. He navigated conflicts with other settlers by finding compromises that satisfied everyone, and his softness was actually strategic patience that required its own form of strength and discipline. He didn't back down from her when it mattered. He just chose his battles carefully and fought them with words and logic rather than with physical dominance. The situation that forced them to actually work together effectively came 3 weeks into their partnership. A dangerous predator native to Caldara 7, something the colonists had named a razorwing because of its blade-like wing structures, attacked the settlement during a community gathering. The creature was massive, aggressive, and capable of tearing through standard protective barriers. Settlers scattered in panic, and several people were immediately injured by the razorwing's initial assault. Kyle and Zareth found themselves in the middle of the chaos, and without discussion or planning, they fell into coordinated action. Zareth engaged the razorwing directly with the kind of fearless aggression that Kyle would have called suicidal if he hadn't seen how effective it was. She drew the creature's attention, used her superior strength and combat training to dodge its attacks while landing strikes that actually hurt it, and essentially acted as living bait, keeping it focused on her rather than on the vulnerable settlers. Kyle provided tactical coordination, using his training to direct other armed settlers into positions where they could support Zareth without getting in her way, calling out warnings about the razorwing's attack patterns he was observing, and ultimately identifying the creature's weak point that Zareth exploited to deliver a killing blow. The entire fight lasted maybe 5 minutes, but by the end the razorwing was dead. The settlers were safe with only minor injuries, and Kyle and Zareth were both breathing hard, covered in the creature's blood, and looking at each other with new respect. Zareth spoke first, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that Kyle thought might indicate approval. "You fight intelligently for someone who is not a warrior. You recognized patterns I missed and provided tactical information that was useful. Perhaps you are not completely useless." Kyle, still coming down from the adrenaline rush, responded, "And you're incredibly effective in direct combat. I've never seen anyone move that fast or hit that hard. Maybe we're not completely incompatible if we can work together like that when it matters." They returned to their dwelling that night without the usual arguments, both processing what had happened and what it might mean for their partnership. Neither was ready to admit the matching might have been correct, but both were starting to think that maybe they weren't as mismatched as they'd initially assumed. In the weeks following the razorwing attack, Kyle and Zareth's relationship shifted from pure hostility to something more complex, grudging respect mixed with continued frustration, growing understanding punctuated by arguments that were becoming less hostile and more like passionate debates between people who actually cared about understanding each other's perspectives. They started having actual conversations about their backgrounds, their cultures, and their motivations for participating in the bonding program, moving beyond just arguing about immediate practical matters to discussing the deeper contexts that shaped who they were. Kyle learned that Zareth hadn't volunteered for the program enthusiastically. Her father, Emperor Krantor, had essentially commanded her participation as part of his broader strategy to position the Draknari Empire as adaptable and diplomatically sophisticated, despite their warrior culture reputation. The Emperor believed the future of galactic politics would favor civilizations that could build genuine cross-cultural partnerships, and he wanted his children to model that capability. Zareth resented being used as a political tool when she'd rather be serving in active military operations, and she was taking out some of that resentment on Kyle as the embodiment of the soft, diplomatic approach she was being forced to embrace. Kyle shared his own background. He joined the military during the border conflicts that preceded the peace accords, had lost friends to Draknari forces during those conflicts, and had initially harbored significant resentment toward Draknari people as a whole. But he'd chosen to volunteer for the bonding program specifically because he believed the cycles of violence would continue indefinitely unless people actively worked to understand former enemies and build relationships that transcended political treaties. He told Zareth directly that being matched with a Draknari princess was both ironic and challenging given his history, but that he was committed to making it work because he genuinely believed in what the program was trying to achieve. Zareth was visibly surprised by his honesty about having lost friends to Draknari military action and his willingness to move past that history. It challenged her assumptions about human weakness. She was learning that choosing peace and cooperation after experiencing loss required its own form of courage that was different from but not inferior to martial bravery. "You have more strength than I credited you with, Kyle Morrison. Many beings would let hatred consume them after losing companions to enemy action. That you choose to build bridges instead suggests a discipline I did not think humans possessed." They began actively looking for ways to work together that played to both their strengths rather than just trying to force one person's approach on every situation. When settlement projects required heavy physical labor, they developed a natural division where Zareth provided the raw physical capability that Draknari strength made easy while Kyle handled planning, coordination with other species, and making sure they were working efficiently toward clear goals. When conflicts arose in the settlement between different species or individuals, which happened regularly in a community trying to blend dozens of different cultural approaches, they discovered they worked well as a team. Zareth's directness established clear boundaries and made sure no one was unclear about what behavior was or wasn't acceptable, while Kyle's diplomatic skills found compromises that satisfied everyone without anyone feeling like they'd completely lost. Their living situation improved significantly as they learned to accommodate each other's preferences and routines. Zareth still did her combat training at dawn, but she moved it outside so the noise wouldn't wake Kyle. Kyle still wanted his quiet reading time in the evenings, but he started doing it in his private quarters rather than expecting silence in shared spaces. They figured out meal arrangements where they each prepared food according to their own cultural practices, but ate together and occasionally tried each other's dishes. Zareth was surprised that some human food was actually quite good despite looking unimpressive. Kyle was surprised he could tolerate some Draknari dishes despite their alarming ingredients. They started training together in the mornings. Zareth taught Kyle some Draknari combat techniques, initially assuming he'd be hopeless at it but discovering he learned quickly. Once she adjusted her teaching approach to account for human limitations in strength and speed. Kyle taught Zareth some human meditation and stress management techniques, which she initially dismissed as weakness but grudgingly admitted, helped her control her aggressive impulses and think more clearly in complex situations. The physical training created an interesting dynamic. They were spending hours in close proximity, often with physical contact involved in demonstrating techniques or correcting form, and both started becoming aware of attraction developing beneath their partnership dynamics. The growing tension between them was complicated by their cultural differences in how relationships worked. Draknari courtship was fundamentally different from human romance. Draknari valued proven compatibility through shared challenges, direct communication about intentions, and formal bonding rituals that involved combat trials and public commitments. Human relationships involved emotional vulnerability, gradual development of intimacy, and explicit discussions about feelings and desires. Neither Kyle nor Zareth knew how to navigate potential attraction across these vast cultural gaps, so both tried to ignore it and focus on their partnership obligations, rather than acknowledge what was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone around them. The situation that forced them to confront their developing feelings, or at least to stop ignoring them quite so obviously, came when they were sent on a mission together. A survey team exploring a remote region of Caldara 7 had failed to return on schedule and wasn't responding to communications. Kyle and Zareth were asked to search for them because their demonstrated ability to work together in dangerous situations made them the most capable team available from the settlement's limited population. The search mission required several days of traveling through difficult and dangerous terrain, camping together in the wilderness, and relying completely on each other for survival and success. It was the most extended time they'd spent in completely isolated proximity, without the buffer of other settlers or the routines of settlement life, and it forced a level of honesty and vulnerability neither had shown before. On the second night, camped in a defensible position with a small fire providing warmth against Caldara's cold nights, they had their most honest conversation yet. Zareth spoke first, unusually hesitant in her phrasing. "I want to acknowledge something, Kyle Morrison. When I was first matched with you, I viewed it as punishment or mistake. I believed you were weak, that your diplomatic approach indicated lack of courage, that our partnership would fail because you could not meet Draknari standards. I was wrong about most of those assumptions. You are not weak. You simply express strength differently than Draknari do. Your approach achieves results that pure aggression could not. You have proven yourself through our time together in ways I respect." Kyle responded with equal honesty, "And I initially thought the matching algorithm had malfunctioned spectacularly, that there was no way someone as aggressive and confrontational as you could possibly be compatible with someone who values diplomacy and careful planning like I do. But I've learned that your directness comes from valuing honesty and efficiency rather than from cruelty, that your high standards push everyone around you to be better, including me, and that your martial skills are discipline rather than just violence. We're different in fundamental ways, but those differences make us more effective as partners than we'd be individually, or if we'd been matched with people just like ourselves." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Zareth asked a question that had clearly been bothering her. The bonding program uses the word mate in some of its literature. Does that have romantic or reproductive implications in human understanding, or is it purely about partnership? Kyle considered how to answer carefully. It can mean different things. Sometimes it's just about partnership and companionship. Sometimes it carries romantic or sexual implications. The program materials are deliberately ambiguous because different species understand bonding in different ways. For humans, close partnerships often develop romantic dimensions over time, but that's not required or assumed. Why do you ask? Because I find myself uncertain about the boundaries of our partnership and what is or is not appropriate to feel or express. In Draknari culture, we bond through proving ourselves in shared challenges and through direct combat. We have been through challenges together, and I have developed respect and admiration that may be evolving into something more. But I do not know if such feelings are appropriate or welcome in the context of this program, or with you specifically." Kyle's heart rate increased as he processed what she was carefully not quite saying directly. "I think those feelings are probably a natural result of spending this much time together in high-stress situations and learning to trust each other completely. I've been feeling something similar, respect and admiration that's definitely evolving into attraction and possibly more. But I also don't know how to navigate that across our cultural differences, or whether it's appropriate given the program's structure." Zareth's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors Kyle had learned indicated strong emotion, vulnerability mixed with hope. "Perhaps we do not need to fully understand it or define it precisely. Perhaps we simply acknowledge that what we feel is real and see where it leads us naturally, rather than trying to force it into either Draknari or human frameworks. That seems wise. Let's just see what develops without overthinking it. They found the missing survey team the next day, injured but alive, trapped in a collapsed cave system, and successfully brought them back to the settlement. The rescue operation required both their skills working in perfect coordination. Zareth's strength to move debris and create safe passage, Kyle's planning to ensure the rescue happened efficiently without causing further collapses. Their success earned them significant recognition from both the settlement community and the program coordinators. But more importantly, it reinforced the bond they'd acknowledged was developing between them. 6 months into their partnership, Kyle and Zareth's relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated when they were first matched. They worked together brilliantly on any practical challenge, their different approaches complementing each other in ways that made them the most effective partnership in the settlement by any measurable standard. But they still argued constantly about philosophy, about cultural approaches, about everything from how to organize community projects to what constituted appropriate behavior in various social contexts. Their arguments had changed character, though, becoming less hostile and more like the passionate debates of people who genuinely valued each other's perspectives and wanted to understand different viewpoints even when they disagreed. Other settlers started referring to them as the fire and the stone, Zareth being the fire that burned hot and intense, Kyle being the stone that withstood and channeled that intensity into productive directions. It was an accurate metaphor that both of them actually liked, finding it captured something essential about how they functioned together. The program coordinators conducted 6-month evaluations with all participant pairs to assess how partnerships were developing and whether any interventions or support might be needed. When Kyle and Zareth sat down with Dr. Chen for their evaluation, she had interesting information to share. "I want to discuss something that might reframe how you think about your matching. When you were first paired, many people, including both of you, assumed the algorithm had made an error because your profiles seemed so incompatible. But I want to explain what the algorithm actually calculated." She pulled up data displays showing complex compatibility analyses. "The algorithm didn't match you because you were similar or because it predicted your partnership would be easy. It matched you because it calculated several important things. First, that you would challenge each other in ways that promote growth rather than stagnation. Second, that your differences were complementary rather than truly incompatible, that Sergeant Morrison's diplomatic skills would balance Princess Zareth's directness, that Princess Zareth's decisiveness would balance Sergeant Morrison's tendency toward overthinking complex situations. Third, that you both had personality traits that would allow you to move past initial conflicts rather than becoming permanently stuck in them. Specifically, you're both committed to principles rather than ego, which means you can admit when you're wrong and adjust your behavior based on new understanding." She continued, "You were never supposed to be a calm, easy pairing that avoided conflict. You were matched specifically for intensity and for the mutual challenge that would force both of you to examine your cultural assumptions and grow beyond them. Your arguments and your passionate debates are actually signs that the matching is working as intended. You're engaging deeply with each other rather than just tolerating each other politely." Kyle and Zareth exchanged glances, both processing this revelation that reframed everything they'd experienced. "So we weren't mismatched," Kyle said slowly. "We were matched specifically because our differences would create productive friction rather than comfortable similarity." "Exactly. And your evaluation results support this. Both your individual psychological assessments and your joint compatibility metrics have improved dramatically over the past 6 months. You're both reporting higher satisfaction, better emotional regulation, and increased cultural understanding. You're learning from each other in ways that wouldn't happen if you'd been matched with partners who were just like you." But before they could fully process this information, a crisis interrupted the evaluation. Security alerts indicated unauthorized persons had infiltrated the settlement, and within minutes, chaos erupted. A political faction within the Draknari Empire that opposed the peace accords and viewed the bonding program as cultural betrayal had sent operatives to sabotage the program by targeting high-profile participants. Princess Zareth, as the Emperor's daughter, was an obvious and valuable target. The attack happened during a community gathering where most settlers were present. Armed operatives moved through the crowd with clear purpose, and Kyle saw one of them approaching Zareth with weapon raised. He acted on pure instinct, throwing himself between Zareth and the attacker, taking an energy blast to his shoulder that was meant for her center mass, while simultaneously identifying the attacker and calling out their position so settlement security could respond. The blast burned through his uniform and caused significant tissue damage, but it wasn't immediately fatal. Zareth's response was instantaneous and violent. She disabled the attacker who'd shot Kyle with brutal efficiency, then secured the area around them while calling for medical assistance with unusual emotion in her voice. The medical team stabilized Kyle within minutes. The injury was serious but not life-threatening with proper treatment. But as he lay on the medical bed being treated, Zareth stayed at his side with expression showing vulnerability Kyle had never seen from her before. Her bioluminescent patterns were showing colors indicating intense distress and concern, and when the medical team confirmed Kyle would fully recover, her patterns shifted to colors indicating profound relief. Once they had privacy, with Kyle injured but stable and conscious, Zareth finally addressed what they'd been carefully avoiding for months. "When I saw you throw yourself between me and that weapon, when I thought for a moment that you might die protecting me, I understood something I have been denying to myself and to you. I care for you in ways that go far beyond partnership or duty or even friendship. In Draknari culture, we prove our bonds through shared combat and by demonstrating willingness to die for each other. You have proven your commitment to me in ways that cannot be dismissed or minimized or explained away as just fulfilling program obligations." She paused, clearly struggling with emotional vulnerability that Draknari culture didn't provide good frameworks for expressing. "I do not know the precise human words for what I feel, but I believe you would call it love. I love you, Kyle Morrison." Kyle, still recovering but fully lucid despite the pain medication, responded with equal honesty. "In human culture, we prove our feelings through emotional vulnerability and through explicit communication about what we feel. So I'll say it as directly as I can. I love you too, Zareth. I've been falling in love with you for months, probably since that first time we fought together against the Razor Wing, definitely by the time we were camping together during the search mission. I didn't know how to tell you because our cultures approach romance so differently, and I wasn't sure if what I felt was appropriate or welcome. But I don't want to hide it anymore or pretend it's not real." What followed over the next days as Kyle recovered was a series of conversations about how to actually build a romantic relationship across their vast cultural differences. Draknari bonding involved formal challenges and rituals proving strength and compatibility through combat trials and public demonstrations. Human romance involved emotional intimacy, physical affection expressed through gestures Draknari didn't have cultural frameworks for, and gradual development of commitment rather than the sharp formality of Draknari bonding. They decided to create their own hybrid approach, incorporating Draknari values of proven commitment through actions and direct communication about intentions, while also making space for human expressions of emotion through words and physical affection that felt awkward to Zareth initially, but which she learned to appreciate as their relationship developed. Their relationship becoming public knowledge in the settlement created mixed reactions. Many participants viewed it as a beautiful example of the program working as intended, taking two people who seemed completely incompatible and helping them build not just effective partnership, but genuine love across species and cultural barriers. But there were also concerns about the political implications, particularly given the assassination attempt that demonstrated not everyone in Draknari society supported this kind of cross-cultural bonding. The program coordinators were supportive, but also worried about whether Kyle and Zareth were prepared for the political pressures and potential backlash they would face. The situation escalated significantly when Zareth received direct communication from her father, Emperor Krantor. The message was formal and non-negotiable. She was to return to the Draknari homeworld immediately to address a political situation requiring her presence as princess and heir to the throne. Her participation in the bonding program was being terminated early due to circumstances beyond the program's control. Zareth was devastated and furious, recognizing this was likely political maneuvering by factions opposing her relationship with Kyle, rather than a genuine emergency requiring her presence. But as princess, she couldn't simply refuse her father's direct command without creating diplomatic incident. Kyle encouraged her to go despite both of them wanting her to stay, arguing that their relationship could survive temporary separation if it was real, though privately both worried about the political pressures she would face once back in Draknari court, surrounded by those who opposed her bonding with a human. Zareth returned to the Draknari homeworld, and Kyle remained at the Keldara 7 settlement. They maintained communication as much as interstellar distances allowed, but the separation was immediately and intensely difficult for both. Zareth faced enormous pressure from conservative Draknari nobles and military leaders, who viewed her relationship with Kyle as shameful, as compromising her status and her usefulness in political alliances that required bonding with Draknari nobility. Kyle faced loneliness and growing uncertainty about whether their relationship could survive the political realities and cultural opposition they were facing from her society. The separation stretched from weeks into months, with both of them trying to stay connected across vast distance while also dealing with their respective situations. Kyle threw himself into settlement work. Zareth dealt with court politics and pressure to accept a traditional Draknari bonding arrangement. Both were miserable, but also committed to making their relationship work somehow despite all the obstacles being thrown at them. 3 months after Zareth's departure, Kyle received communication that shocked him. Emperor Krantor himself was requesting a private meeting with Kyle on the Draknari homeworld. It was unprecedented for the Draknari emperor to directly invite a human, especially a relatively junior officer with no diplomatic credentials beyond the bonding program. Kyle had no idea what to expect but knew refusing wasn't an option. This was either an opportunity to fight for his relationship with Zareth, or it was a disaster waiting to happen, but either way he had to go. The journey to the Draknari homeworld took a week, and Kyle spent the entire time trying to prepare for every possible scenario, while also being terrified. He was walking into a political situation he had no ability to navigate successfully. When he arrived, he was immediately escorted to the imperial palace, an imposing structure that managed to be both architecturally beautiful and obviously militarized, with defensive systems integrated into every aspect of its design. He was brought through elaborate security and protocol checks before finally being granted private audience with Emperor Krantor in a formal chamber that was clearly designed to intimidate visitors through its sheer scale and grandeur. Emperor Krantor was exactly what Kyle expected and more, imposing even by Draknari standards, radiating authority and martial capability in ways that made Kyle feel like a child despite his own military experience and training. The Emperor studied Kyle with focused intensity that made it clear every aspect of Kyle's character and capabilities was being assessed and judged in real time. When the Emperor finally spoke, his voice carried absolute command. "Sergeant Morrison, My daughter Zareth has informed me that she wishes to formally bond with you permanently according to both Draknari and human traditions, creating an official recognized partnership between a Draknari princess and a human soldier. This proposal is politically complicated in ways I suspect you understand only partially. There are powerful factions within my government and military who view cross-species bonding as weakness and betrayal of Draknari values, who believe Zareth should bond with a Draknari warrior to strengthen internal alliances and produce heirs who carry pure Draknari bloodlines. He continued without giving Kyle opportunity to respond. However, I am emperor not because I blindly follow tradition, but because I understand that strength comes from adaptation and from building genuine partnerships that expand our capabilities rather than limiting ourselves to comfortable familiar approaches. I supported the bonding program because I believe the future belongs to civilizations that can cooperate effectively across differences. But I need to understand what you specifically offer my daughter and what you represent about human capabilities that the program was designed to demonstrate. The Emperor moved closer, and Kyle felt the full weight of his attention. Zareth tells me you have proven yourself through combat and through your willingness to take injury meant for her. This demonstrates courage that Draknari respect. But I need to understand your character beyond dramatic moments of crisis. Convince me that you are worthy of bonding with a princess of the Draknari Empire, that your relationship with my daughter serves both her interests and broader alliance goals, and that you understand the responsibilities and pressures that come with being bonded to Draknari royalty. Kyle took a breath, drawing on every bit of courage and honesty he possessed. Your Majesty, I won't pretend I'm what Draknari tradition would choose for Princess Zareth. I'm human, I'm not nobility, I don't have the martial achievements your culture values. But what I offer Zareth is genuine partnership built on mutual respect, complementary strengths that make us both more effective together than separately, and love that I believe transcends our cultural differences. Over 6 months together, we learn to understand each other, to value what each of us brings to challenges, and to build something real despite initially thinking we were completely incompatible. He continued with growing confidence. I've learned from Zareth about Draknari values of honor, directness, and discipline. She's taught me that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes direct confrontation is the most effective approach. But I hope I've also taught her things about human culture, about the value of diplomatic approaches that achieve goals without unnecessary conflict, about emotional intelligence as a different form of strength, about building cooperation through understanding and compromise rather than just through hierarchy and force. Our relationship demonstrates that humans and Draknari can learn from each other and become stronger through that exchange rather than weaker. Emperor Krantor listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Kyle finished, the Emperor asked pointed questions testing whether Kyle truly understood Draknari culture or was just repeating things Zareth had taught him. He asked about specific Draknari cultural practices and traditions, about how Kyle would handle conflicts between human and Draknari values, about what Kyle understood about the political pressures Zareth faced as princess. Kyle answered as honestly as he could, admitting ignorance where he lacked knowledge, but also demonstrating genuine understanding of Draknari perspectives, even when they differed from human approaches. After nearly an hour of intense questioning, Emperor Krantor finally made his judgment. You are not what I would have chosen for my daughter if I were selecting purely based on traditional Draknari criteria. But the bonding program's algorithm chose you after analyzing factors I do not fully understand, and I have learned to respect systems that produce results even when their methodology is opaque. More importantly, Zareth has chosen you after 6 months of direct experience living and working together, and I trust her judgment about who will make her stronger, happier, and more effective in her roles as princess and as individual. He paused, and something that might have been approval showed in his expression. You have demonstrated courage by coming here knowing you would face scrutiny. You have demonstrated honesty by admitting limitations rather than pretending expertise you lack. And you have demonstrated understanding of what matters to Draknari culture, even while maintaining your own human values. These qualities suggest you may indeed be worthy partner for my daughter. You have my permission to formally bond with Princess Zareth according to traditions of both our peoples. Though understand this comes with significant expectations and responsibilities that will test you constantly. But Kyle felt overwhelming relief and gratitude. Thank you, Your Majesty. I understand the responsibilities and I'm committed to honoring them and to supporting Zareth in her roles while also building a life together. He was granted immediate permission to see Zareth, and their reunion after 3 months of painful separation was emotional in ways neither tried to hide or control. They held each other in the formal imperial garden where they'd been given privacy, both expressing how difficult the separation had been and how much they'd missed not just each other but the partnership and daily life they'd built together. Zareth finally pulled back enough to look at Kyle directly. My father has given permission for our bonding, but I need to ask you formally according to both our traditions. Kyle Morrison, will you bond with me permanently according to Draknari and human customs? Understanding this means building a life together across our vast differences, facing opposition from those who believe cross-species bonding should not exist, and probably continuing to argue constantly because that seems to be fundamental to how we process the world together. Kyle responded with certainty. Zareth, I will. I'll bond with you, build whatever life we can create together, face whatever opposition comes, and definitely continue arguing with you because our arguments are how we challenge each other to grow and understand different perspectives. I love you, and I want to see where this supposedly impossible partnership leads us over the years ahead. Their bonding ceremony was elaborate and politically significant, incorporating both Draknari and human traditions in ways that honored both cultures. The Draknari elements included combat trials where both Kyle and Zareth had to demonstrate their martial capabilities and coordination. Kyle acquitted himself reasonably well despite being obviously outclassed by Draknari standards, which Draknari attendees viewed as showing appropriate courage even in the face of physical limitations. The human elements included spoken vows expressing emotional commitment and promises about how they would support and love each other through challenges ahead. The ceremony was attended by Draknari nobility, human diplomatic representatives, and was broadcast as major political event, demonstrating the bonding program's success at its highest levels. 2 years after their initial matching at the Galactic Unity Center, Kyle and Zareth had built a life that successfully bridged their cultures and proved their partnership worked not despite their differences, but because of them. They split their time between the Caldara 7 settlement, where they'd built their initial partnership, and the Draknari homeworld, where Zareth had responsibilities as princess. They faced ongoing opposition from conservative elements in both societies, but they also had growing support from those who viewed their relationship as evidence that cross-cultural cooperation could work at the deepest personal levels. They became advocates for the bonding program, speaking publicly about their experience to encourage others to embrace the program's potential despite its challenges. They demonstrated through their relationship and their work that challenging each other, arguing passionately about differences, and refusing to simply compromise away your cultural values could actually strengthen a partnership when both people were committed to understanding and growth. The final scene shows them back at Caldara 7, training together in the early morning as they'd done since the first months of their partnership. Their movements were